5-year-old Achen Loy has just arrived at Soroti Hospital in eastern Uganda after 4 hours by truck. The doctors suspect she has sepsis, a bacterial blood infection, or malaria. There are effective medicines, but it might be too late. Up to 1 in 6 children who arrive in African hospitals in her condition die, well over 1 million every year. So can anything be done? This is the story of an attempt by doctors to bring an emergency treatment from the developed world to Africa to save critically sick children like Achen. But it did not turn out as expected. As Achen sleeps closer to death, her blood vessels lack fluids. This is shock. Her body is concentrating all available blood at the center where the vital organs are located, reducing circulation to the limbs. She has a fever, but her legs and arms are cold, with a weak, rapid pulse. In wealthy countries, children in shock will be given an emergency treatment called fluid resuscitation. Through an intravenous drip, they are quickly given 1 or several large doses of fluids, called fluid boluses, to try to keep circulation going and buy time for other treatments like antibiotics or antimalarials to work. But in wealthy countries, hospitals also have ventilators and other life support machines. Soroti Hospital, like most in Africa, does not have such equipment. So, would it be safe to use fluid resuscitation for Achen? Fluid resuscitation was first used for battlefield wounds, where bleeding led to shock. For injuries, burns and diseases like cholera, where people lose fluids, it has saved countless lives. Over time, doctors found that fluid resuscitation could also reverse the signs of shock in children with fevers who had not lost fluids. Arms and legs will warm up. Children will regain consciousness.
As a paediatrician in the UK, I had witnessed many children whom I'd given fluid resuscitation to getting better. So it was felt to be a very, very good thing.
In the last year?
Yeah, the last year.
Okay, all right.
12 years ago, Professor Kath Maitland moved to Kenya. There, she saw many children dying of shock in the first hours in hospital. Nicknamed by her team as the Professor of Fluids, she was a strong believer in giving boluses.
In Africa, where infections are a very common cause of admission to hospital, very few children were receiving what we felt was the benefit of fluids, and this certainly had to be explored and, if not tested, in a clinical trial in Africa.
In fact, fluid resuscitation for children in shock had never been tested anywhere in a randomised clinical trial. The evidence all came from observation. As the practice spread to Africa, some wanted to check its safety, especially after the WHO issued guidelines encouraging very rapid fluid resuscitation.
The WHO guidelines encourages aggressive management of shock, 20 milliliters per kilo as fast as possible. And this can be repeated 3 or 4 times within 1 hour. In practice, I would like you to imagine a typical 4-year-old who weighs about 16 kilos. This would mean that the child is receiving about 1 liter of fluids. You're actually almost replacing the whole amount of blood that they have. You are talking about 5 glasses of fluid. But you imagine that this is being given intravenously and very fast.
It is much more than a child can drink.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
In 2008, intensive training for the FISH trial finally started.
The heart rate is 50.
The trial will be carried out in real emergency rooms in Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania. Over 2 years, the trial team recruited more than 3,000 children with shock caused by common diseases that produce fevers. Children who have lost fluids through diarrhea or injury are not included. The children are randomly divided into 3 groups or arms. 2 groups are given moderate fluid resuscitation, one with saline, the other albumin. The 3rd group, or control group, are only given fluids slowly to replace what they would normally drink. Apart from the fluids, all participants get the best treatment locally available, including oxygen, antimalarials and antibiotics. All vital signs are carefully recorded over the next 48 hours. The researchers need to see how many children in each group survive. In Mulago Hospital, Kampala, Mariam oversees data collection. As the trial progresses, she does not know the results, but she can form an impression. Whilst checking data, she sees little difference between the groups. But on the ward, she saw some children given boluses recover quickly.
When a child received the bolus, usually they began to amend faster. By the 4th hour, they are much better. But those who didn't get their bolus, you would see how they struggle. There are children that you know in your heart that if they did not get that bolus, you're not sure if they would have survived.
Marian is seeing what countless others have observed. Indeed, doctors visiting Uganda are incredulous that they should be doing a trial to test a treatment so widely used in the developed world. One specialist from the United States intervened to give a child more fluids more quickly.
So it stands up and puts the drip running. It wants to increase the distance so that the drip would run faster. It was literally squeezing the fluid into this child. So when I told him we're doing a fluid trial, he laughed. He was shocked. He said, "You don't need to do this. We already know the answer. Fluid is good." Everywhere it is done, in the US it is done, in the UK it is done, in Australia it is done, in the developed countries. We thought we were backwards.
The data is entered into computers in Kilifi before being sent for analysis by statisticians at the Medical Research Council Clinical Trials Unit in London. Only after 3,000 children have been recruited does a clear picture emerge. It is an enormous surprise. Children receiving fluid boluses are at a greater risk of death.
The results show that 89.4% of children who receive boluses survive the first 48 hours in hospital. However, children who didn't receive boluses but were given fluid more slowly did better. 92.7% of them survived. This difference is significant. It means if we give boluses to all African children with shock, as in the FEAST trial, between 3 and 4 in 100 would be expected to die as a result of the treatment.
In January 2011, the Committee of Independent Experts overseeing safety decided to stop the trial. They called Kath Maitland in Nairobi.
I got a phone call telling me that they were going to stop the FEAST trial, and I thought we'd achieved the result that we'd been waiting for 10 years to achieve, that fluid boluses were going to save lives. But they told me that fluid boluses could not save lives of children with severe febrile illnesses in Africa. This was, for me, absolutely devastating.
The results surprised me. This is because I saw a couple of children improving after getting big amounts of fluids. But I was more surprised because the results were against the current recommendations by WHO and against what is the normal practice in the wealthy countries, and this surprised me absolutely.
There was remarkable consistency in the result. Children living around the sites get a wide range of illnesses, including malaria, sepsis, pneumonia, and meningitis. In all these groups, fluid resuscitation was harmful. The same was true for different definitions of shock. Indeed, the more serious the shock, and the sicker the child, the greater the risk posed by giving rapid boluses. 4 months after the trial was stopped, the clinical teams from all the sites got together in Soroti, Uganda, to be told the result. Before they knew, they were asked to predict what it will be. Did fluid resuscitation work?
We didn't believe it worked so much.
Because they were dying patients and they were saved.
We had our first patient who was brought in a moribund state, and after the initial bolus, the girl got up and asked for a drink. So by that, it made us feel that fluids are actually very important, and it's good that we administer them rapidly.
Yeah, according to how I've been observing the children whom we've been treating, they've actually been coming up after giving the boluses.
Children that give boluses, I think some of them benefited.
Kids who received boluses actually improved quickly. So I think boluses really help in the immediate outcome.
Those who had no boluses did better than children who had a bolus.
So how does one explain the disbelief of the trial team at hearing the result?
So boluses were harmful.
Was what they had seen at the bedside wrong? After publication, the researchers looked case by case at all the children who died. They found that many did indeed initially improve. Arms and legs did warm up, but this did not mean they were out of danger.
The analysis of the data showed, rather like we had seen at the bedside, that children at 1 hour after their boluses, their shock had improved. There's even a large number of children who actually woke up, but that did not translate to a survival benefit. In fact, children in the bolus arms were much more likely to develop catastrophic shock in the hours following this. And this is one of the reasons why you have to do a clinical trial.
The FIST results demonstrate very clearly that doctors and nurses cannot know what to do just by observing. It is why randomized controlled clinical trials like FIST have become the gold standard of clinical research. In June 2011, the paper was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. At that time, there was optimism that guidelines, at least for Africa, will change quickly. But sometimes it takes a lot to change medical guidelines. There were multiple objections. Had boluses been given to the wrong children? How could so many years of practice be wrong?
I think it's been shocking how long it has taken the world to respond to the FEAST study, and I think particularly looking towards the WHO as a norm-setting organization, that they really need to react to this new evidence.
In MSF, we're teaching more and more ETA, but we're not...
So in the 2 years following publication, there has only been piecemeal change. East African countries and some organizations like MSF are adopting new guidelines. But for children with severe signs of shock, the World Health Organization continues to recommend aggressive fluid resuscitation. WHO officials have said they cannot change policy on the strength of just one trial. But their critics reply that this is a classic catch-22 because after such a clear result as FEAST, it will be hard to get ethical approval for another trial. So, in the absence of consensus, what treatment should be given to 5-year-old Achen Loy in Soroti Hospital? FEAST showed that fluid resuscitation could be harmful, but it shed no light why. Could it be that the chemical makeup of the fluids causes harm? Or could it be the speed that they are given? Or might shock actually be protective, the body's response to cling on to life a little longer? Only further research can answer such questions. Achen spent 2 days in the emergency room. She was given antibiotics, antimalarials, and blood transfusions for acute anemia, but no fluid boluses. As she slipped in and out of consciousness, 2 other very sick children died on the table next to her. Eventually, Achen recovered. Today, she is back in her village with hope restored of leading a healthy life. But what about the millions of other children around the world who arrive in shock in hospitals without intensive care units? What treatment should be given to them?
Jolly, jolly, be